Hi, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning from wherever you're joining us from. I'm Sean Osimbo, and we are on the season finale of the African Football Business Show brought to you by the Football Foundation for Africa. Oh my, it has been quite the amazing journey till here. And week in, week out, we've been bringing you guests from across the world where we talk about improving African football, the steps to take, because this is the right time to actually talk about African football. And today we are humbly joined by Professor Chuka. I have to say your second name correctly, Onwumechili, who's a professor of communications, Howard University in Washington, D.C., all the way in the United States. He's the one who'll be wrapping up season 1 for us. Welcome to the program, Professor.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Yes, amazing. And we are also glad to host you. We are humbled and we can't wait for you to share everything you know about African football with us. So let's just get right into it, Professor. Kindly just do a brief introduction of yourself, what you do for a living and everything, and how you also got involved in the African game, you know, the research and all, you know, the writings and everything you've put down.
Okay, actually, my main job is as a professor of communications. I teach at Howard University in Washington, D.C. Mm-hmm. And by the way, during that period, I've spent 1 year teaching in Nigeria and working for the Digital Bridge Institute. But I'm back in the United States and teaching at Howard University. My involvement with football really goes way back. Mm-hmm. I would say probably I was maybe 12 years old. And I listened to my first radio commentary. This was a radio commentary by a legend, a Nigerian legend by the name Ishola Folorunso. Mm-hmm. And I listened to his radio station, and I basically got linked to football forever. And since then, I've been collecting data on Nigerian football. From that data, when I got into the university, teaching in the university, and I got tenured, I decided I'm going to change my focus, my research focus, because initially I was researching in telecommunications, researching in intercultural communication. But after the tenure, I said, you know what? Why don't I research in the thing that I really love, which is football and African football? So that took me to doing a lot of research in football. And since then, that's what I've been doing a lot of work, trying to basically, I want the world to know more about African football and all kinds
Mm-hmm.
of areas in African football. I'm
Mm-hmm.
basically scratching the surface. There is a lot more to do.
Amazing, amazing. So, during your research, any notable achievements the African game has made so far in recent years?
Yeah, I think a lot,
Mm-hmm.
quite a lot. In my own area of research, some of the things that I have looked at in terms of progress of African football is, of course, the migration and the return migrants, how they have helped to improve the national teams. The national teams have improved in leaps and bounds, really, because if you think about, I remember watching my very first World Cup that I watched live was 1974. And in 1974, we had a Zairean national team that dominated Africa, lose
Mm-hmm.
like 9-0 to Yugoslavia. Today, there's no African team that's going to that's going to lose with such a scandalous margin. That's not going to happen.
Yes.
We
Mm-hmm.
have a very strong team. I mean, very strong teams today. Then the other thing is also we've dominated the junior competitions. I think for me, there's still far more to do. As I said, for one, I think that the management of football in Africa ought to really see some progress. Where we've got some progress on the field, but we want to also see some progress in the back offices. What's going on in there?
Yes, and I know you're talking about the achievements, so and everything you have seen, researched, and even written about. But there's also the other side of football, where I know most people, most analysts, most researchers are still saying Africa has still a long way to go when it comes to improving the game. So, what do you think is ailing African football, and is there any hope to take this football to the level and standard that it's supposed to be?
Yeah, I think there are major problems, several major problems. For me, the main one that I see that's
Mm-hmm.
really a big obstacle is the state involvement in football. I know that the state looks at it as part of developing the youth, but
Mm-hmm.
if we look at the state involvement, it basically has also hindered progress. I think that the next level of improvement is the state withdrawal from football, allowing private interests to get involved. I think
Mm-hmm.
it's only when we have private interest involved that we can see major progress. In my view, I think that's one of the key areas that I want to see happen is where there is real privatization, because I think it's only then that we can achieve our goals in terms of full professionalization of the game in Africa. And
Mm-hmm.
also that way you can generate investments within within football in Africa.
Yes, and so many of these points that even some you've just mentioned here, your one point, are
Mhm.
mentioned in this book, which is a totally brilliant book, and that is Africa's Elite Football. And that's why we're even here today to talk about Africa's elite football, the future of Africa elite football, what goes into it and everything. But now to the people who do not understand so much, they know the game, they don't understand the leagues and all that. Kindly can you talk to our viewers what first, we define what is Africa's elite football. Why did you and other writers sit down, research, and pen down your thoughts? And what is the book all about? And what do you expect Africans to learn from it?
Okay, the first thing was we did the book primarily because we've been reading about African football a lot of times. You read about African
Mm-hmm.
football in terms of footballers migrating to Europe. It was always about what they're doing in Europe, how those European based footballers are doing in Africa. And I'm saying, look, there's still football being played in Africa. And it's not just youth football. There is top level football, which is what we have defined as elite football that's going on in Africa. And it's time for people to talk about this elite football. How can we improve it? What are the things that we can do to bring this football to the attention of the world? That's the main goal of the book. Unfortunately, a book can only cover so much. So we try
Yes.
to cover as much as we could in the
Mm-hmm.
book. But I still feel there are a lot of things that we got to talk about in terms of talking about elite football in Africa and how to make that even better.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and
Mhm.
you've touched, and the good thing, I know it's just a book, and we are hoping now Africans can actually reach out and go get this book and learn more. But let's break now down some of the topic areas that you have covered in this book. You have
Mhm.
politics, you have media. As I was going through some of the chapters you had sent, we have all these talent development, infrastructure, and all that. So from your research and everything, which African countries do you think have gotten part when it comes to talent development, when it comes to infrastructure concerning these elite leagues?
Okay, I take the two that you mentioned, talent development and then infrastructure.
Yes.
With talent development, we see there are several African countries that have done very well here. The leading light initially was Nigeria, or Nigeria and Ghana, in terms of what they have done, particularly at the junior levels, at the
Mm-hmm.
war, at the global level. We've had them do well and win the World Cup at those levels. That's talent development that we've seen there. And in those countries, they also have academies, even though they are not fully well organized. We could do a lot better, but they've been producing basically a lot of talent even till today. But lately, we've also seen really major improvement in Senegal, where they've built some academies that have been very influential. For instance, if you think about Senegal, for example, I would say in the 80s,
Mm-hmm.
Senegal was really an also run. Nobody really knew about Senegal in terms of competing in Africa. But because of these academies and access to these boys and their development, Senegal
Mm-hmm.
right now is one of the top nations in Africa because of their productivity at that level. So
Mm-hmm.
that's one of the things that we have to think about. The other one that you did talk about was what was the second one,
In infrastructure.
the infrastructure. In
Yes.
terms of the infrastructure, this is really a big problem. In the book, I do talk about few areas, but these are very spotty, where people have focused their attention on infrastructure. But I have to
Mm-hmm.
admit that this is the biggest problem we have in Africa. And even some of these states that we talk about, like Nigeria and all of these that do well, the infrastructure
Mm-hmm.
is poor. It's still state owned. You don't have
Mm-hmm.
individuals or clubs owning these infrastructures, except perhaps if you think about, say, somewhat in North Africa, where these infrastructure at the private level, where you have some clubs owning infrastructure. But this is an area that we really need major improvement going forward.
Yes, and we have seen some of the African sponsors or even African advertisers. They go out there, and it's easier for them, the investors, to even put their money outside Africa, even to the European leagues, compared to here back at home. And there you have your point on infrastructure, talking about how they're still state owned. Why is it that African investors sometimes are afraid to put their coin and invest back to even the people who actually make the companies what they are?
I think there is a good reason for that, and I
Mhm,
really don't blame them. You're not going to put your money in an environment that is unstable. And that's what we find right now is a very
mhm,
unstable football environment where it's the state that continues to make the rules. And you, as a private investor, you want something where the rules are basically stable. You don't want sudden changes in rules. In Egypt, for example, you have some private interests that are participating, but they're dominated by still state owned clubs. So you find that clubs in there are at the mercy of the state, where state make rules, and those rules affect these private clubs. I think
mhm.
progress here would be a case where the entire sector is privatized so that rules are made to help those private investors. But that's not the case now. So this is a major problem, and that's why I think that the next step is really privatizing in football itself.
Yes, and I hope also we'll have one day a discussion deep into the privatization of African football. So let's
Mhm.
quickly go to, as I've told you, investors also get attracted to the European leagues. But one thing we have realized, it's also our own fans, African fans, being so interested, so vested into European leagues. And when it comes to elite leagues, even Africa's elite leagues. The reason why they could be called Africa's elite leagues is because of the fan base. But at the same time, the same fan base is so obsessed with the European leagues. Why do you think this is still an issue in Africa? People just being attracted day in, day out to the European leagues.
Mhm. I think the answer is pretty simple in terms of when you really look at what is it that the media in Africa reports. They are reporting on European football. Fans basically are going to follow what they see constantly in the media. So the media is a critical part of this. If the media today is focusing on European football, that's where the fans are going to go. And essentially, this is in our area now. I'm going into academics here, but there is
It's
a great theory,
okay.
great theory in academics that we call agenda setting. It's
Yes.
the media that sets the agenda for the people. Or what the media reports a lot, people tend to believe that's the most popular things. That's the most things that they need to pay their attention on. That's called agenda setting. And that's really what's happening to African football, is that the African media are focusing their attention on reporting European football, and therefore the fans focus their attention on that. To reverse that, you have to get to a point where, the focus shifts back to the local league. And by the way, the reason why this has happened over years is that if you really track this, you go back to the early 90s or even late 90s and late 80s. What happened was the government started to divest its interest in media. And when the government divested its interest in media and opened up the media market, which was called media liberalization, they allowed private interests to go in and buy these media interests. But what did these private interests do? What they did was they looked at it and said, you know what? To make money easily, I don't have to produce my own programs. What I've got to do simply is buy rights to showing European football and show European football 24 hours. And guess what? They now basically trained the Africans on European football, and they wanted more and more of it because of the glitz surrounding that game. And they forgot the local interests. So the privatization of the media in Africa, that's one of the things that it created, is this loss and interest for European football. That's something that needs to be reversed somewhere where the media, the local media, begin to show interest in the local game. The moment they start doing that, the fans will return.
Yes, and I love this point about the media because I'm also in the media, and yes, I admit it has been sometimes, we give so much attention to the European leagues. But here's the deal also, and but you can also advise how the media can actually grab on this. The more the European leagues grow, in some form of way, the interest and attraction is also back to Africa, because some of the big names in the European leagues come from the continent. When you start with Odion Igalo, your fellow countrymate who plays for Manchester United, we have Naby Keita, we have the likes of Idris Ugué, he's Senegalese. They are attracting the attention and bringing the attention back home to Africa. But my question is, and when you talk to even some people, when you talk to other journalists who are outside, the European journalists, they want to cover the African game, but because of the structures and because of the systems, they are not they don't know where to start. How is it that the African media can hop onto this interest that even the Europeans right now are having about African football, so that we can drive, the African football agenda forward?
I think one of the things, of course, is the local administrators, they have to make the league more attractive. That's one of the things. Then the other thing is you have to look at it also as a competition. The game itself, you are not going to play the game the same time you're going to play the European game, because right now people are bred on European football. They're not going to go to the African game if it's the same time. One example that I'm going to give you is, I think it was about 2 years ago, one of the old teams that was popular in Nigeria and that was popular in Africa, that's called the Enugu Rangers. They had not won a championship for decades. And about 2 years ago or 3 years ago, they were on this run into a championship that they had not won. One of the brilliant ideas that they brought up was, okay, we're going to play these games, but we're not going to play it during the daytime to clash with the European football. We're going to play it at night time. And that's what they did. And guess what happened? The stadium filled up that's in Enugu, where the Rangers were.
Yes.
So essentially, there are methods that you can use. I, for example, think, yes, it might be too expensive using television rights to show, to show football, because basically with TV, you're going to ask yourself, okay, are the TV people going to be interested in local football? You don't have fans, you don't have all of this. But I'm saying, yeah, if the regular TV is not interested because they are not sure that you're going to draw the fans, why don't you go to streaming the games, live streaming of the games on the internet? That's another way that you can go and build up this following. And I also think that football, if you're talking about streaming, that people really have to think about, it's not just the game. Football is about entertainment. Why not marry it along with, say, movies, local movies that are made? Let's say, like in Nigeria, you have Nollywood that is so popular. You have the music industry that is getting popular. Put all these three together, they are all entertainment. Put it out there, and you're going to get fans that are music fans. You're going to get fans that are movie fans, and they come in and they watch football, and you grow the followership for football. That you really have to think outside the box.
Yes, thank you so much, Professor, for that. Because now I feel like the point we've been talking about across the season is what we need to get doing, where needs African solution. And that is just one of the amazing ideas that actually we can adjust, because the interest is already there from Europe.
Yes.
So why not jump on it with our own ways, in our own style, and let this, revenue and everything start flowing in. Now, let's talk about these clubs that are involved in Africa's elite football. First of all, what do you think of just African club football in general? Do you think the management and the institutions have done enough to promote these clubs that are taking part in the, let's say, top few African elite leagues across the African countries? Yes.
Yeah, I think it's uneven. I really want it to be better. There are some stable clubs, particularly in North Africa, then in South Africa, that are really well managed. You think about Sundowns in South Africa, you think about in North Africa, you're thinking about Ali National, you're thinking about Zamalek and clubs like that are there and have been stable over time. And some of these even have clubhouses, they have their training centers and so on. But mostly in Africa, those ones do not represent the cream of African clubs. They are the ones that are just exceptional. Okay. Most African clubs, what are they? All they are basically is that these are clubs only in name. They have players that they pay, but they don't even have clubhouses. They don't have the training center of their own. And these are where changes need to be made. And that's really what I would like to see, is for other African clubs to look to things like Zamalek, look to Sundowns and say, here's the people that we can use as a model to build across the whole of Africa and create a very good club environment. And I think if that is done and the government somehow withdraws its interest in terms of participating in the league, that I think will grow the game a lot quicker. One of the examples that I keep giving is, if we can, and I give a Nigerian example here. Of course, I give Nigerian examples a lot because I'm from Nigeria. But the reason I give this example is that in my lifetime, when I was growing up in Nigeria, the movies that we watched were American movies or Indian movies. Then the music was the same, American pop music and so on. But guess what has happened in Nigeria? Over time, if you go to Nigeria now, they play the local music. They watch the local movies. And these movies and music are gradually getting into the United States and elsewhere in the world. The radio station here in Washington, D.C. are playing Nigerian music in the morning. That's because the interest went inwards. Football can do the same thing. And that's my hope and that's my dream, that football, we can find a way to revive local football to be just as good as the music, just be as good as the movie industry.
Yes, and your point brings me to this point. We had a special session with the African legend Jimmy Ajoviboko, where he said that uh, we as Africans we have to start embracing each other. We have to continue learning from each other. I think most people stretch so far outside to go to Europe to learn. Yet here in Africa, we can continue learning from each other. And an example that has been given is definitely the Simba CEO. Simba is a club
Uh-huh.
in Tanzania, Barbara Gonzalez, who went to Al Ahly. So when you see that flight, it's just only 5 hours away. That is from Tanzania all the way to Cairo, Egypt. Went to Al Ahly, visited them, now learning how these clubs are run. Because now in Tanzania, we have seen the football is now blowing up, especially African football. We've seen immense steps and all that. How do you think Africa can work as a bloc? Like, which conversation are we supposed to talk about so that African teams, African FAs, the countries can actually start working together, helping each other, and learning from each other, Professor?
I think that's difficult. I wouldn't say that I have answers to it. And the reason why I say that is difficult is there are government interests in the game. However, their interest is remarkably different from some of the things that we are talking about. For the
Yes.
government, their interest is mostly about creating some popularity for votes and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
So they are
Mm-hmm.
looking at it from the development angle. But I think the government, if the government can be convinced, you could still participate in football in terms of development, but just not at the elite level. You can do it at the youth level. That's fine. But withdraw from the elite level. Let the business hands handle that at the elite level. I think
Mm-hmm.
that we can begin to see some of those changes because let's face the fact. Really, government appointees, what are they there for? They know that they are there for just a very short term. So some of them are there to do what? To make a name in terms of either make some money or so, but they lack the idea to improve the game. I think if you have a business person in charge of football in these places, they are looking to make money. How best do I improve this entity in order to make money? And that's how this game will be improved, not with the state. I think it's
Mm-hmm.
time that the state looks at this and withdraws interest from it. I think when we have that state withdrawal from the elite football, that we can begin to see, major improvements in the game in Africa, I think.
Yes, and now this brings our point to how the African clubs are run. If we've seen some of them are run professionally, others are, still struggling. And I remember on episode 5 we had Dr. Gerard Akindes who said Africa cannot afford professional football sports. Do you agree with his sentiments?
Well, Gerard is a friend of mine, and I think he's basically looking at the situation on ground today. But from my viewpoint, I want to look at beyond today to think about the future, what is actually possible. I do admit, in terms of my ideas about what is possible, is not going to be a piece of cake because you
Mm-hmm.
really have to be able to convince the state, the governments, to withdraw from the game. But sincerely, I think football can be run by private interests in Africa and that they can make money. But it's
Yes.
not something that can be done right away. It is something that's going to take some time to get to. And you have to convince the state to withdraw.
And I know as you talk, I can see it's in your heart about the
Mhm.
privatization of African football, and you're talking about governments withdrawing. First, is it easy for the governments to withdraw right now for the betterment of the game? And then number two, will the people on the ground accept the privatization? Because, for example, in Kenya, we have clubs that are community-based clubs, and I know that there's so many across the continent. Do you think the Africans on the ground who will accept, like, someone is coming in, changing the game and all that? Because at the end of the day, even when the private investor comes on board, they'll come with their own ideas. They'll come maybe with a different, from a different point of view of doing things. And that might prove a bit tricky to some of the people who have been supporters for these clubs.
Mhm. I think change, usually when you have change, change is basically an upheaval, meaning there are going to be some struggle. There are some people that are not going to like it. That is something that you have to accept. But what you're looking at is the long term. What is it that's to be gained? You're not going to have a change where everybody is very happy. There are going to be certain struggle in the way. One of the biggest struggle that I have already been talking about is the struggle with the state, because the state will not want to withdraw willingly, because the state, basically, as I said, there are individuals who are gaining from the government participation. So they're going to fight back. They're not going to go away easily. So that has to be overcome. But I think in terms of like community clubs that you mentioned, those, as long as the state is not involved in it, they could stay there if they can still compete and make money. So that's not to say that those ones should go away. I'm just saying the direct state interest where the state owns a club and things like that, those should be withdrawn. So I really think that this is a possibility, but I'm not here to say that this is easy to achieve. It's certainly by no means easy. It's going to be a struggle, because if you see that there are people who are profiting by the current situation, like some government agents profiting from the current situation, they're not going to go away easily. They're going to fight back. But I think it's one where you're going to use the strength of argument to make this work. That is to try to convince them to withdraw. And I also believe that as the African states themselves, the business class, begin to accumulate more power, that they are probably going to force the government to shift. We've already seen this happen in certain places. So I don't think that this is so far-fetched. One of the things you have to think about is, if you were there, say, in the 90s or early 80s, the state owned broadcasting. They didn't want to withdraw, because broadcasting was something that let them control the people. But there were certain things that forced them to withdraw from broadcasting. And it wasn't simply a willing withdrawal. One of it was that the satellites, the digital broadcasting satellites, start coming in. So individuals could access these satellites without government being able to control it. The government eventually found that this was a losing battle, and the government withdrew from it. Then there were pressures from World Bank and so on that forced them to withdraw. I think that with football, that my hope is that the situations that are similar to this, that we can get situations that are favorable to the argument that I'm presenting, that can force the government to withdraw from control of football.
Yes. Wow. I hope the officials are watching, because it's time for African football to rise. And now let's go. I know we had touched on this point, but let's bring it back. Funding and sponsorship. When it comes to African football, it's so sad what is happening on the ground, despite the talent, despite what some, even the players and the officials, are putting across. Why are there disparities? Why is it that when someone wants to put his coin in Africa, they will come, they will try to negotiate, they will try to bargain and all that. But when they go abroad and they're told, you know what, it's $1 billion, they don't even bargain, they don't think twice, they give out the money. Why the disparities?
You're talking about who right now?
Funding and sponsorship. Now the investors across the world, when they invest in the African game, they're not serious. But when they go abroad, they don't bargain, they don't negotiate, they give out all the money.
I think that should be pretty clear in terms of, if you're looking at it, if I'm an investor myself, I would have some serious questions about investing in the African game, because it's an environment that is currently unstable. One of the instabilities is one that we've already talked about, which is you go to many of the leagues, even in Egypt, where you have Al Ahly and Zamalek. If you look at their league, majority are government owned. What you're going to ask yourself as an investor is that, if I put my money in this league, who will be controlling decisions in the league? These government entities. That's a problem, because they can change any day, and basically they are not concerned about making money. But your concern is about making money. So it's not a very good environment for you. So that's one of the things you have to worry about. Then the second thing you got to worry about is, where are the fans? We've already talked about this. The fans are dwindling in several places because of the interest in European football. So the league is got to be serious in terms of how do I grow the market, the fans that are out there, so that if an investor is coming in, the investor is looking at, okay, here's the market, I can make money off this type of market. But you're not going to make money in terms of what you're looking at right now. But I really think that there is potential out there, that with changes that are going to be made to the game, or that it's possible for you to make in the game, the interest from investors will be there. But we have to start making those moves.
Yes. And now we've talked about funding and sponsorship, the media's involvement, government involvement, the privatization of the game. Let's now shift to another topic that we talked also earlier on the Africa Football Business Show, but also a topic that you have mentioned in the book. And this is about the football academies across Africa. What are your thoughts on these institutions, and do you think they have the capability to change the game or to improve the African game?
Yeah, I think this is an area. Actually, I listened to the show that you had with Gerald, because this is an area that he works intimately with. And in terms of the academies, there are, I would say, the good and bad. Let me start with the good rather than the bad. I think the good is that the academies have really helped to improve football in Africa. If you track the improvement of football in Africa, you will find that it is somewhat correlated with the growth of youth football, the organization of football, youth football, where they play far more organized and meaningful games than they used to play, say, in the 70s. Then the mushrooming of academies and so on. All of these have somewhat correlated with improvement in African football, because from those academies, you've been able to grow talent that have gone to Europe for further development. And these ones come back to help the national teams and the national game. Then even some of them that don't go to Europe, they are able to stay back and participate in continental competitions or in national competitions. You remember probably the most famous was with ASEC, when ASEC played a Super Cup, and they went into this Super Cup and they suddenly promoted so many of the academy players, and they were playing a team from North Africa, and the North African team felt this was an insult, playing against the academies. Guess what? At the end of it, not only did these young boys beat them, but they dominated them because of the sort of training that they had received. And this training wasn't in Europe, mind you. This was training they received where? In Ivory Coast. So they've been that improvement. But having said this, also I say that there are also some downsides. Some of the downsides that I talk about is, one is that youth football and the academies have not been very well organized and managed in Africa. You would find out that essentially what people are doing, again, I give examples of Nigeria, but it's also happening elsewhere, is you have people who are just out there to make money. They are not really interested in the growth of these youths. What they are doing is, one, they are establishing academies any which way without even approval. They are doing this stuff because their market is just Europe. They don't care about the boys. They don't care about the game. That's a big problem. And this is a big task for the football associations, the FAs. They have to find a way to be able to handle this problem. Because if they don't handle it well, basically, and we're almost getting there. So it's not simply talking about something that's happening in the future. We're getting to a situation where basically we don't even have control of our own game. We are becoming a colony or colonies for the European game, meaning people are producing all kinds of youth players, smuggling them overseas. That's also robbing the local game of some talent. Then these boys are also not at the point where they are fully ready to go overseas. And FIFA tried to deal with this issue with some rules, but it doesn't mean that it has stopped. People are taking advantage to make a quick buck here and there because there is no control over what's happening with at the youth level.
Wow. Yes. I know. I was literally listening to you and feeling each and everything you're saying, where, you know what, it's time for Africa to put their structures in place, It's time for Africa to actually concentrate itself and find the best solutions to improve the game. So people are asking, do you have the book with you? Africa's Elite Football. They need a visual if it's
Yes,
anywhere close to
yes,
you.
yeah, it is.
Yes, show it to them. Structure, Politics, and Everyday Challenges, edited by the professor himself. Amazing, amazing. So before we
Yeah.
talk about the future of Africa's elite football, well, how can people get that book? You can just hold it as we talk about it. Yes.
I think the book basically is online.
Mm-hmm.
If they search my name and put in Africa's Elite Football, they are going to find the book. Or if they go to Routledge Books, Routledge Book, that's the publisher,
Mm-hmm.
they can also find the book.
Yes. Any other projects you're working on currently?
Oh yeah, we are working on several projects, but the one that's amazed me that I'm really, I would say that I am learning a lot of new things
Mm-hmm.
was we started a research last year looking at wives of footballers. And I will
Oh.
tell you, I'm learning a lot. There are things that I had no idea was happening. So it's a learning time for me, a learning exercise. We are publishing the first, I think the first article in it is going to be published by IRSS, which is the International Review of Sociology in Sports. They are
Mm-hmm.
publishing the first one where I think we use the heading where it says, those playing in Europe, do they have five heads? Basically, these are women telling their husband, why are you still playing in Nigeria? You have your mates
Yes.
playing in Europe and they're making money. Those ones don't have five heads. So go to Europe and play. So
Wow.
we are talking about these women are really very, I think, very resilient women. Going into this, I had the impression that footballers are the ones that just make the money for their families. And I always wondered in Nigeria, where footballers are owed a lot of money throughout the
Mm-hmm.
season, how
Mm-hmm.
does the family survive? But in doing this research, I've come to understand what's going on. A lot of these women have established their own businesses and they help their husbands and they basically run the families because
Wow.
their husband, each season, their husbands move from place to place. And if you know Nigeria, a club might be, say, 300, 400 miles away. They move to that club, so they have to live in a dorm over in that club, say in Maiduguri, whereas their family is in Enugu. So who manages that family? It's the
Mm-hmm.
wife who manages the family. So the wife takes the role of both the husband and the wife, and they are the ones that are in control. And they run that and they run the extended family. So these women not only have they acquired power, they've also basically done incredible jobs in terms of keeping the family going in the absence
Mm-hmm.
of the husband. So it's been, I mean, it's been a learning experience for me in terms of what's really happening behind the scenes.
Wow. That's a very interesting topic. I'm just like, wow.
Mhm.
And that's also a different way of seeing it because also when it comes to European football, the African players who have gone to Europe, most people think, the wives, it's just about the glamour and, looking good, spending money. But then there's a whole lot that also happens behind the scenes, even just to make sure your husband is comfortable and, at peace so that when he goes on the pitch, he performs well. Okay.
Mhm.
I can see Mr. Brian, the guy behind Football Foundation for Africa, is just with his comments on the private chat. Nice surprise, once in Europe. Nice, nice, Brian. Okay, okay. So,
Mhm.
oh, that's an amazing topic. We'll have to talk about that every day because all these things contribute to the growth of football. The mental
Exactly.
state of the player, how they are, how they. Anyway, let's now talk about the future of Africa's elite football. What next? What next? If you can break it
Mhm.
down for us, Professor.
For me, I think I look forward to a great future for the game, but a lot of changes need to be there. I think if you listen to what Infantino, the FIFA president, said the last time about creating a continent-wide league, although he stopped
Mm-hmm.
short of expressing the modalities for such a league. But one of the things that is a takeaway from what he's saying is there is potential for Africa to create a new type of league that is of private interest that can actually make money. You can do it either at the local levels, which means in within countries, or you can do it countrywide. I think that's a potential that's out there, but there's still a lot of work that needs to be done for us to get to that point. And I think also one of the things that these leagues should be thinking about, particularly in places where you do not have television coverage right now. A great example is Nigeria, but so many other countries as well. What you should think about, what those countries ought to think about is, even if I don't have television coverage, I can establish my own channel, meaning television that's on the internet. You have these channels, and my view about it, like in Nigeria, I know that they are thinking about doing this, but I think that they've stopped short of where I was hoping that they would go, which is, if you're doing this, you have to start thinking about football primarily, not just a game. You have to think about football as entertainment. It's an entertainment package, meaning if you're creating this television for it, whether it's on the internet, wherever it is, what you want to do is to marry it with other things that are of interest, meaning like movies, African movies. The other thing you want to also think about is marry it with African music. You're going to, the people who love these things often love three of them. So there are ways to create this synergy with these three things. So I think there's hope, but things have to be managed really, really well.
Wow, thank you so much, Professor. And I hope so many officials are watching this and all stakeholders, so that they be improved. So
Hello?
quickly, let's now. Can you hear me? Can you hear me
Yeah, I
now?
can hear you.
Yes,
Uh-huh.
perfect. So let's now go into the questions, and we'll start with Mutale Kambatize Puleno Mbebeta, who says, enjoying. I have a question. I'm a Zambian sports journalist. How do you think we can improve as African sport writers and journalists? I think now in terms of marketing and promoting the game.
I think there's a lot of ways that can be done. In fact, I talk to Nigerian journalists all the time, and what I think that you guys really should do, because you are a key, I mean, you are a critical part to improving the African game, because I think communication is essential. Journalists, whether you're in Zambia or wherever you are in Africa, think about covering the local game, because the public can see that game from your writing. It's your writing that attracts them, that bring people to love the game. I got interested in football by doing what? I already mentioned my encounter, how I love the game by listening to commentaries made by Ishola Folorunshò. And when I met Ishola Folorunshò years later, after my university, I was wowed by him. I mean, I was stunned that I was in the same room with Ishola Folorunshò live. So there are people that look at journalists and their eyes to the game is from what the journalists talk about. So I think the journalists are critical in focusing our attention to the local game.
Amazing, amazing. So we are the eyes of the game. And now let's go to Collins Marita. And he says the professor has talked about media and looking for other avenues to air football like live streaming. But what about bringing fans back to the stadium? What can be done to achieve this?
I think both of them are actually connected.
Yes.
Because if you do the live streaming of those games, and now you also marry it with what I've talked about, which is the movies and music. If people continue to see that, basically what TV does or streaming would do is they begin to create a sense of someone becoming a star that they want to go see live. Let's say, for example, if you have footballers that are playing for, which country is he from?
Collins Marita, Kenya.
Okay,
Kenyan.
let's say it's Kenya, for example.
Yes, yes.
Let's say, and you're talking about, you're showing Kenyan football, right?
Yes.
What can be done here is you have a show where there is a movie, then there is music. And in that movie, maybe you have a player who plays for Gor Mahia, for example. This player comes and participates in that movie. That person is being created as a star. Now, as people see that movie, they want to go to the stadium to see this player, to see, is this player any good? What can he
Yes.
do? So it's that marriage, those kinds of things that are going to bring people to the stadium.
Yes. Wow. Wonderful.
Mhm.
Wonderful. And no, that is what we keep on talking about just growing the game, the game. Okay, we have Collins Fresh against it. Professor said the government should withdraw from football. How can we reconcile this with what is happening in Europe, where the EU is playing a more active role in football business?
I think that can easily be, you can reconcile all of that, because remember what the EU basically do is that it creates an environment for it. It doesn't participate in day-to-day activity. When I talk about government withdrawing, I'm not saying that government cannot play some sort of participation, cannot participate at the top level where they are participating in policy and so on. You're still going to do that. But in day-to-day activity, they should withdraw their interest there. But still, there are going to be rules that people have to abide by. And that's essentially what EU does. And that's really what should be done in Africa. You don't want the government participating in day-to-day activity. They can participate a little bit away from that. That is in terms of rulemaking at the league, creating basically an environment for the businesses to thrive.
Yes. And also, we have Ro Nyangeri.
Uh-huh.
He says, what is Professor's take on positive interference by government in sports, e.g., disbanding corrupt federations versus FIFA's non-interference stance?
I think there are two things here. One of the things, it depends on what kinds, the scope of that interference. Basically, if you're interfering with day-to-day activity, there's going to be a problem. But certainly, if somebody violates the law of the land, the law of the country, that person, it doesn't matter whether they're in sports or in some other thing, they should face the music. So I think there are two different kinds of things. Making sure what does that interference constitute. I think that's what the defining moment is. If it's a violation of the law of the land, I don't care whether you're in sports or in any other thing, you got to face the music.
Yes. And as we move on, another thing also that's close to my heart, Professor, is women's football, and also women's football in Africa. Do you think there are elite leagues, Africa's elite leagues, that have actually, invested and promoted the women's game? And what steps need to be taken to actually promote the women's game across the continent?
Now, the women game is sort of different, and I think is right now behind, but there needs to be a lot of work, because I think the women deserve that. And I understand that the CAF, the Confederation for African Football, that they are going to start a continent-wide women competition at the club level. This is something that didn't exist. They only had one at the national team level, that they are going to start one at the club level. And by the way, at several countries, including, I believe, Nigeria is one of them, and some of the East African countries, they also have running leagues that they have out there. But that's still not enough in terms of women development, because if you really think about it, African women, they have developed much, much faster than the men in terms of football competition worldwide. If you watch the last Women World Cup, you would see that our women, yes, they didn't win. Yes, they didn't get to the semifinal, but their game is improved. And this is with very little given to them. So imagine what they could do if as much is given to them as the men have been given. So I think there's potential for the women game, but there is a lot of work to still be done.
Yes, and Professor, before your last words, let's also just quickly touch on a topic about international migrations of players. Tell us about the social, cultural, and economic impact of all this.
You said, what was the last one?
The international migration of players, the social.
Hello?
Hello, can you hear me, Professor?
Yeah, I just didn't hear the last part. I know I had the international migration.
Yes, the social, cultural, and economic impact of the international migration of players.
Okay, there are several impacts. One of them we've already mentioned in passing, which is the social impact. We talked about the migration, even though it wasn't international, but internally. But
Yes.
the same thing can also be talked about internationally, where you're now having spouses, women that are staying at home that have to take on the role of both the husband and the spouse, and to bring up the children alone. That's one of the impacts, social impact there. And in terms of economic impact, you see that a lot of places where you have footballers that have gone overseas, they come back and they have helped develop their own local areas. Uh, this is happening all over the continent. We even had some. I think you had somebody in your show about two shows back, or maybe the last one. The guys who are building the academy in Senegal.
Yes. Oh,
That's
the
one of
last one.
the
Yes.
Yeah, that's
Yes.
one of the impact where they come back and they give back to their community. So there are those kinds of impact that are all over the continent that we are seeing in terms of migration of footballers. And I say here, migration is not just migration to Europe, that there is also migration internally that's taking place. Mhm.
Yes. Amazing. Thank you so much, Professor. So, yes, we have gotten to the end of the show. Professor, give us your last words on just, everything, your projects, Africa's elite football, and just the African game as a whole.
Okay. My goal, as I said, is I'm hoping that there'll be a lot of people there that are interested in research in African football. I think there's a lot of things that we need people, researchers as minors, that go right on the ground to find out stuff about the game in Africa and write
Yes.
about them. And also people who are interested in the business to bring the African game right up to where it belongs. Because if we are producing all these talents out there, let's find a way to create an environment where a substantive number of them stay home and ply their business and make the African game better than it is right now. Some of these things are things that I research. As I pointed out to you, my current research interest is really looking at women of football, I mean, wives of footballers in Nigeria, to find out how they're coping with life without their husbands being at home. And there are a lot of interesting things that I'm learning. I'm really amazed by what happens, because I'll tell you, I'm a novice when you come to that, learning about their life. And it's been amazing stuff that they've been talking about. Really very, very interesting work. So that's the things that I'm working on right now in terms of that. But I'm also doing several book projects, mostly writing chapters for several edited books that are out there. But my general goal throughout all of this is, how do I talk about the African game?
Amazing. How can people find you on social media, Professor?
Social media, I'm there on I'm there on Twitter. That's
Twitter?
one. But also from time to time, I do write for some blogs, some Nigerian blogs. Then you can also find me if you Google my name. Then you'll find some of my work. When you Google my name, there's a lot of my work that's on the internet. Some of them are books, but not necessarily books. There could be, papers that are presented that are also online.
Thank you so much, Professor. What a way to end our first season of the Africa Football Business Show. Thank you so much. Thank you for your wisdom. Thank you for sharing everything and your knowledge about African football. And we are hoping the stakeholders and everyone who's watching this can actually learn or take off a few points here and there to continue improving the game across the continent. Because as our guest last week, that is African legend Jimmy Ajoviboko, said, talent is not enough. It's time for Africa to set our structures straight. It's time to promote our own, and it's time to find solutions to our own game. Thank you so much. And I know you'll be back. You'll be back soon, because this whole African game is just a whole world on its own. So I know we can't solve all the issues and talk about all the issues in
True.
1 hour. So the more you continue appearing on the show, I know the more the conversation and the more people can actually continue learning from it. So thank you so much, Professor. And what a
Thank
way to end
you.
the show. Thank you so much. We are humbled to have you. Please feel free to be saying hi, and also we can't wait to host you again. So this was the season finale of season 1 of Africa Football Business Show. It has been amazing. We've had so many amazing guests. The first show was definitely Brian Musala, who's the founder of the Football Foundation for Africa. We need more voices like him. He took this step,
Yes.
and here we are now talking about African football, Professor. Wow. Now if we have, imagine, tens of thousands of people like those across the continent, you can imagine what it can do to the game. So thank you to all the guests, Brian Wesala, David Goldblatt, Peter Alegi, we had Boko, we had Jared Akinda, so many people. Thank you so much. I can't wait for season 2. We'll be coming back soon and we'll be giving you all the details. Have a lovely, lovely time wherever you are. Thank you for joining us on the Africa Football Business Show, brought to you by the Football Foundation for Africa. I'm Shona Simbo. Take care.